Welcome to the Deathcast.
Now we're going to the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, a community understandably racked with fear after two young girls believed to have been abducted and disappear in a space of 2 months. Now, the first to vanish was 12-year-old Ashley Pond, last seen January 9th, walking to a school bus stop. Ashley might have been written off as a runaway, but on March 18th, Miranda Gaddis, Ashley's good friend, also disappeared on her way to school without a trace.
By sheer chance, I had spoken with Miranda about her missing friend.
It's really hard to believe that having one of your friends or something. It's just really different and really sad.
That exchange took place at the school bus stop. Ashley and Miranda never made it to the mornings they vanished, up the hill from the apartment complex where they lived and right outside the home of Ward Weaver. The girls were both friends with Weaver's daughter. They were on the dance team at school with her, and both had spent nights at his home. Sleepovers he seemed excited describing when we first talked to him in July.
You could not walk anywhere in my front room without stepping on a body.
See, we were on to Ward Weaver based on a tip we received about the bushy-haired neighbor at the top of the hill. And it wouldn't take long in the course of this conversation to learn why.
They are hassling my family, my friends. They are saying that I am the number one suspect.
He told me he flunked 2 polygraph tests, but also walked me through his home to show he had nothing to hide. A month later, I learned the truth. He was taunting me here. He'd already buried Ashley under this concrete slab, and he'd used this freezer to store Miranda's body. Realities that became evident by the end of the summer, bringing out the vulnerabilities in all of us.
At about 4:15 this afternoon, the Oregon State Medical Examiner has positively identified the remains discovered yesterday as the body of Miranda Gaddis.
Hello again, and welcome to the Deathcast. I am your host, best-selling independent author Ian Totten, and I'd like to thank you as you join me today while we look at the disappearance and murder of Ashley Marie Pond
and her friend Miranda Gaddis in 2002.
Before we dive in this week, as always, I'd like to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Author Totten. That's AuthorTotten. You can find me on Facebook at Ian Totten Author. There's a tab on that page that'll take you right to the Deathcast group where we discuss the cases covered on the show as well as all aspects of true crime. If you'd like to help support the show, I am on Patreon at Ian Totten Author, or if you want to make a one-time donation, PayPal at Ian Totten. Now that the plugs are out of the way, grab yourself something to drink. I have my coffee and my cigarettes. Sit back, relax, and let's go into the crypt. Ashley Pond and Miranda Gaddis were 2 12-year-old girls who lived in the New Elk Creek Village apartments in Oregon City, Oregon. Ashley was described as a popular student who was on the swim team, and along with her friend Miranda, was on the school's dance team. We're going to be looking at Ashley first, as she was reported missing first. She was born March 1st, 1989, to a woman named Lori. Ashley's birth father was a man by the name of Wesley Roetger, although Ashley was unaware of this until she was 9 years old. At the time of her birth, Ashley's mother was going out with a man by the name of David Pond, and the two eventually married, with David treating Ashley as his own daughter. Ashley has been described as a quiet, well-behaved child who could entertain herself for hours and enjoyed being hugged. Ashley had a fairly regular upbringing until the time she was about 9 years old, when David and Lori divorced. The divorce had a devastating effect on the young girl who was caught in the crosshairs, as Lori wanted child support payments, which David refused to pay. A paternity test was ordered, at which time it was discovered that Wesley was Ashley's real father. She began spending time on the weekends with Roetger, and family and friends all noted an instant change in her attitude as she became sullen and withdrawn, later turning to confrontational. It got to the point that Ashley would resist going with her father, and eventually Lori pressed her on the issue, only to discover that Wesley had been sexually abusing the young girl. In January of 2001, Wesley Rotger was indicted on 40 counts of raping and sexually abusing his daughter, but 8 months later, most counts were dropped, and he eventually pleaded no contest to one count and was released on probation. This is the kind of thing that absolutely sickens me, to see someone do that to a child, and I really believe that in this day and age, Wesley would be receiving a serious prison term, although I think for pedophiles that sentence is far too light, but that's a story for another time. Over the ensuing months, police were called to the Pond residence numerous times, including one incident where Lori was found to be drunk and neglecting her children. It was because of all this turmoil that Ashley began spending a lot of time with the Weaver family, whose young daughter was in Ashley's grade and who she was friends with. Now, if you see pictures of Ashley, seems to be a happy, bubbly child, but that couldn't have been further from the truth, because the abuse that had begun at the hands of her father was to continue, and it's been reported that at least one teacher attempted to make the school and through them the police aware of this, as this teacher, Ashley's reading teacher, stated that she witnessed the patriarch of the Weaver family, a man by the name of Ward, kissing Ashley on the lips, although at the time nothing was done about it. Ashley spent most of the first half of 2001 with the Weaver family, including accompanying them on a 2-week vacation to California, while the situation at Ashley's home continued to deteriorate, with the police being called out multiple times, usually in regard to her mother neglecting the children and drinking. And knowing what we know now, I have to wonder if the police had taken a closer look at Ashley's life, they may have discovered the abuse she was suffering and therefore might have survived. In early August of 2001, Ashley confided to her reading teacher that Ward Weaver was molesting her and that he had threatened to testify against her in her father's rape trial if she dared to tell anybody about the abuse. I have read some accounts that she had also accused 2 other men of molesting her, but she later recanted this, although I have found no real corroborating any evidence. In any event, after she had made the accusations against Weaver, Ashley stopped going over to their home and began to feel ostracized from the family. And it's really sad to look at this case, because if this were to happen now in 2020 in our hypersensitive society, the police would be all over Ward Weaver, investigating his background to try and find the validity of the accusations. But as it was 2001, they did what they did back then, which is drag their feet on the case. On January 9th, 2002, Ashley called out goodbye to her mother around 8:15 and headed out to the bus stop. She was never seen again. That afternoon, when she did not return home, her mother Lori began asking around the neighborhood and quickly ascertained that Ashley had not even gotten onto the bus. She called the police and informed them that her daughter was missing, insisting that the young girl had not run away. A fairly large search party was organized with Ashley's mother as well as Miranda Gaddis getting involved in it. And they canvassed the entire neighborhood. There were even a number of news pieces about the disappearance. This was a fairly big story in Oregon City. The dance troupe that she was a part of even organized a benefit for her, scheduled to take place on March 23rd of that year, which is where the clip at the beginning of today's episode of Miranda Gaddis pleading with her friend to return home comes from. Unfortunately, Miranda would not get to participate in the dance fundraiser as she disappeared not long after on March 8th, 2002. Who was Miranda Gaddis? Miranda was born on November 18th, 1988 to Michelle and Jason Gaddis. Miranda has been described as a girly girl who enjoyed dancing and wearing glitter. And she, like her friend Ashley, came from a troubled, broken home. In fact, when Miranda was 6 years old in 1995, her father was arrested for sexually assaulting 2 minors, one of whom was his own daughter, Miranda. When the police came to the house, Jason grabbed his young daughter and held her against him, demanding that the police leave before he release her. Instead, he was tackled from behind by police officers and taken into custody. Jason ended up getting 6 months in prison and 54 years of post-release supervision for his crimes. And at some point during this, naturally, Miranda's mother, Michelle, divorced her father and got into a relationship with a man by the name of Brett Edward McEney. Brett, much like Jason, had a taste for young girls, and he began to sexually molest Miranda and 2 other young girls before eventually being convicted of his crimes. Following all of this, Miranda and her 2 siblings were removed from her mother's home and placed in a foster care for 18 months, with Miranda going on to receive counseling to help her deal with the abuse that she had suffered. During this counseling, Miranda wrote an essay on child abuse that was said to be so powerful that a non-profit ended up using it in their training manuals. One line from the essay has been seen as somewhat prophetic, as Miranda wrote that people getting physically and sexually abused is a huge problem in the world. It can kill people. March 8th, 2002, Miranda was last seen in her kitchen preparing her lunch. Her mother, Michelle, said goodbye to her and headed out the door, believing that Miranda would do what she always did, get herself ready for school. At roughly 1:30 that afternoon, she received a phone call from her oldest daughter informing her that Miranda was not at school. Upon contacting the school to learn what was going on, Michelle learned that Miranda had missed every class that day. Knowing that something was wrong, what with Ashley Pond having gone missing not 2 months beforehand, Michelle contacted local law enforcement, and in no time, both state and federal law enforcement were involved in locating Miranda. It wasn't long before both Ashley and Miranda's disappearances were being broadcast nationwide, including being shown on the television show Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. Unfortunately, however, the police really had no leads, with the FBI